In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to create a wrapper API in Power Automate that checks suspicious URLs for threats. This is going to quickly check if an input URL is a malware, forced download, or phishing threat. I'm going to demonstrate how to set this up using Postman, but you can easily incorporate this into any of your applications with the URL that Power Automate generates for flows triggered by HTTP requests. I'm starting off here on the flow diagram page in Power Automate. I've already set up an automated flow, so the first thing I'm going to do is get my flow to trigger based on an HTTP request. To do that, I'm searching for the request connector and selecting that option from the list below. After that, I'm selecting the when an HTTP request is received trigger. As we can see at the top here, this trigger will generate a URL which we can use to activate the flow remotely, but only after we save the flow. So I'm going to ignore that for right now and click on the Show Advanced Options tab at the bottom instead. From there, I'm going to set the request method to post because my eventual request will be sending data to the server. Now that the HTTP request trigger is set up, I can now click New Step and incorporate the website scanning action. To get this action, I'm first typing CloudMersive into the search bar, and once the CloudMersive connectors populate below, I'm selecting the CloudMersive Virus Scan connector. Please note that I use these connectors all the time for demonstrations, so my information is saved, but if you haven't used this connector before, you'll first need to enter an API key. You can get one for free on the CloudMersive website with no commitments. Now that I'm on the actions list, I'm selecting the action called Scan a Website for Malicious Content and Threats. Inside this action, I'm clicking on the URL request field, navigating over to the dynamic content window, and then selecting the body option. After that, I'm all done with this step. At this point, I have a flow that will receive a URL string from an external application and scan that URL for potential threats. Now all I need to do is share the results of this scan back with that application. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and click New Step and once again search for the request connector. Once I click on it, I can then select the response action. Within this action, I can decide which data to return to the application by setting the headers fields in the middle. The most important response from the Virus Scan API is the Boolean indicating whether the input URL contained any threats, so I'm going to enter clean result as my first key. Next to that, in the Enter Value field, I'm then going to select Clean Result from the Dynamic Content window. For my second key, I'm going to enter Website Threat Type. Next to that, I'm going to select the corresponding response value from the Dynamic Content window, just like I did the first time. Now the application making the URL scan request can find out if the URL was dangerous, and if so, what type of threat was identified. At this point, I can save and test my flow. After my flow saves, I'm going to quickly jump back into the trigger action and copy the HTTP post URL that Power Automate generated for me. Now I'm going to click Test, select the manual option, and finally click Test at the bottom once again. Once I do that, Power Automate is going to wait patiently for me to ping the URL that I just copied to run the flow. At this point, I can get working in Postman. From the Postman homepage, I'm going to click on Workspaces up on the top left here and then click Create Workspace. I'm then going to name my workspace Test, click on the Personal option, and then click Create Workspace. Once I'm in my workspace, I'm going to open a new tab next to where it says Overview at the top. From here, the first thing I'm going to do is change the request type from GET to POST. Right after that, I'm going to copy the Power Automate URL into the Enter URL field. Below that field, I'm now clicking on Body so I can configure my input request to match what the flow is expecting, and then I'm selecting the Raw Input option. In order to test the website scanning wrapper I created, I'm now going to copy a test URL directly into the raw text box. Now it's time to run the test by clicking Send up at the top here. Once Postman completes the request, I can review the results at the bottom of the page by clicking on Headers. In the headers, I can see that my flow worked successfully without me needing to go back in to check Power Automate at all. My URL received a clean result true response, and of course, no website threat types were detected as a result of that. Now that my flow is up and running, I can scan as many different URLs as I want from a simple text input. The only important thing is to make sure the URL is fully formed with HTTPS at the beginning, because otherwise you might receive a clean result false response when the API is unable to connect to the URL. That concludes this demonstration. You can follow the same logic in this video to create API wrappers with just about any Cloud Immersive connector in Power Automate. Be sure to check back in on our channel for more Power Automate tips and examples in the future.